Death at Devil's Bridge. Chapter 2. The hour before dinner, while we wait for the late arriving guests and for the announcement that the table is ready at last, gives us time to tell our friends grand tales about our lives. Jennifer Lashner, our Victorian grandmothers. Lord Marston, the Honourable Mr. Charles Rolls, the Honourable Miss Patsy Marston, Mott announced from the drawing-room door. Lady Catherine Artley Sheridan took her husband's arm as they went out onto the terrace steps to greet the guests. The open windows had admitted the clackety clank of Bradford Marston's Daimler pulling up the gravel lane and his sister's fresh laughter as the trio alighted, and Maud's announcement was entirely superfluous. But announcing guests was Maud's job, and Kate did not interfere. When she had inherited Bishop's Keep from her aunt Sabrina Artley several years before, she had determined she would change only what was unjust or just plain unacceptable to her American sensibility, and would accommodate herself to the rest. But when she and Charles Sheridan were married 3 months ago in a private ceremony in the village church, Kate discovered that she had much more to accommodate to than she reckoned with to begin with. A disconcerting discovery, to be sure, for Kate loved her new husband deeply. She must love him, she reasoned to herself, to be willing to give up her freedom, her hard-won independence, and become the wife of a man who, upon his brother's shortly expected death, would inherit his father's peerage, his family's estate at Somersworth, and the dependency of his mother and his brother's wife. At the thought of her mother-in-law, Kate flinched. She had wanted Charles's family to attend the wedding, but he had dissuaded her. Kate was anxious to meet her new family, so a few days later they travelled to Somersworth. But when the Dowager Baroness learned that her son had not only married without her knowledge, but had chosen a wife who was both American and Irish, she became hysterical. Dinner that evening was an agony, and Charles and Kate had left the next morning. "I'm sorry," Charles had said miserably as they drove away in a carriage. "I thought she would take it with a better grace. I hoped—" He took her hand. "But she'll come around. She will come to love you as I do." Kate hardly shared his confidence, but she managed a smile. "Until she does, we have our home at Bishop's Keep. Then you don't mind staying there, my dear, until all this is sorted out." Kate thought of the mouldy old pile that was Somersworth Castle, and the angry old woman who ruled there, and nodded vigorously. "As far as I'm concerned, we could live at Bishop's Keep forever. It suits me perfectly." Bishop's Keep seemed to suit Charles, too. He had spent most of his time in the last few months modernizing the old Georgian house, installing water pipes and plumbing and gas lighting, and an electric dynamo, which, he claimed, would eventually power all manner of mechanical appliances. There was even talk of adding a telephone as soon as the exchange came to Dedham. Charles' innovations did not always work the way he anticipated, however. The pipes clanged as if a dozen smiths were pounding on them, and Mrs. Pratt was so afraid of the new gas cooker that she refused to touch it until Charles himself demonstrated its safety features. But Charles was so proud of these improvements that Kate scarcely had the heart to criticize, or even remark that she herself was rather fond of paraffin lamps, however old-fashioned they might be. Kate pushed aside these ungrateful thoughts and welcomed their guests, who were still goggled, capped, and coated. "Please," she said to Patsy, "let me help you with your things," and stepped forward to unwind her pretty young friend, the daughter of Lord Christopher and Lady Henrietta Marston, from the heavy veil that covered her elaborate ash-blonde coiffure. When the layers of motoring apparel had been removed, Bradford Marston, Patsy's elder brother and a close friend of the Sheridans, introduced Charlie Rolls. Unencumbered of cap and goggles, Rolls was revealed to be a darkly handsome young man of 19 or so, just Patsy's age, with deep-set eyes, dark brows, and a rakishly devil-take-it air that owed something to the alertness of his look and the wilful, almost arrogant lift of his firm chin. Kate had understood from Patsy that he had just completed his first year at Cambridge. "He's the third son of a first baronet of something or other," Patsy had confided, revealing in those words his lowly social status. "But Charlie's position scarcely matters. I don't intend to marry him, or even to fall in love with him, just to enjoy his company. "Whatever Mama says," she added defensively. Kate did not reply. Although inwardly she applauded Patsy's independence, several years before, Lady Henrietta arranged the marriage of her eldest daughter, Eleanor, to a wealthy candy manufacturer, a marriage that had proved disastrously unhappy. Kate knew that Lady Henrietta intended her youngest daughter to wed Squire Roger Thornton of Thornton Grange, the stern, dry offshoot of an old county family whose extensive lands adjoined Marsden Manor. She would be aghast at Patsy's friendship with a brash young man from Cambridge, whose father, Lord Langattock, had only recently been admitted to peerage. Charlie Rolls might be handsome as a lord, but his lack of title and fortune made him practically unmarriageable. However, Lord Christopher and Lady Henrietta had taken themselves, and Eleanor and her infant son, to the south of France on an extended holiday, leaving their younger daughter under the watchful eyes of Patsy's spinster great-aunt, Miss Penelope Marston. Great-aunt Marston was not the vigilant chaperone that Lady Henrietta imagined her to be, however, for she retired at an early hour with a lapdog and a box of sweetmeats, leaving her niece to her own entertainments. Currently, Patsy was entertaining herself with the Honourable Charlie Rolls, who was the house guest of her brother Bradford. She was also spending a great deal of time at Bishop's Keep, where Sir Charles was teaching her the craft of photography. He had instructed her in the fine points of dark-room practice and had ordered 2 cameras for her from the London Stereoscopic Company in Regent Street, a lightweight pocket-sized Vesta folding camera and a Freyner No. 1 which took lantern-sized plates. Patsy seemed talented, and Kate hoped the girl would pursue photography half as enthusiastically as she was pursuing the young Mr. Rolls. The last guest arrived a moment later. He was Barfield Talbot, the vicar of St. Mary's the Virgin, a stooped, elderly man with pale blue eyes, deeply set in an aquiline face beneath a mane of white hair. The good vicar was dressed carelessly, his cravat askew, coat missing a button, and hair as wild as if he had just that moment dismounted from the safety bicycle that he rode on his parish round. He hadn't, of course. He had been fetched by Pocket in the pony cart. "Ah, Kate, my dear," he said with special affection, and bent low over her hand in an old-fashioned gentlemanly way. "It is good to see you looking so well. Marriage clearly agrees with you." Vicar Talbot, who had performed the Sheridans' wedding ceremony, had been a friend of Kate's Aunt Sabrina. He had generously made himself her friend since her arrival from America, a friendship that Kate welcomed, for it made up the part for the family that she had lost. Kate's father, Thomas Ardley, and her Irish mother, Aileen O'Malley Ardley, had both died when Kate was but a child. The orphan had been raised by her uncle and aunt O'Malley, he a policeman on the streets of New York, she a mother of 6 children, whom she fed, clothed, and educated. For Aunt O'Malley was determined that all her children should go to school. Kate expected to make her own way in the world and laboured hard at her lessons. When she was old enough to seek employment, she worked first as a governess, then as a private secretary, and then, a fate which Kate still often marvelled, as an author. To supplement her meagre income, she had written a story and then had been fortunate enough to find a publisher who was willing to gamble on her work. Before she knew what was happening, her fictions, written under the pen name of Beryl Bardwell, had been accepted by an enthusiastic reading public. Beryl's earliest stories were of the sensational variety penny dreadfuls, with such titles as The Rosicrucian's Ruby and The Missing Pearl, suitable for Frank Leslie's popular monthly in which they appeared. "Our readers take great delight in exotic murder and its detection," Mr. Leslie had remarked as he handed Kate the payment for Beryl's 3rd thriller. "I advise you, young lady, to continue to dip your pen in blood, and you shall do quite well indeed." For a time, Kate had been glad enough to dip Beryl's pen in blood and to trade her lurid tales for the independence that money brought. But as she became more skilled as a writer, she grew increasingly weary of the frenzied drama that Mr. Leslie and his readers demanded. She particularly objected to the succession of bloody killings that substituted for plot in such novels, and for her own inclination was rather to the subtler violence of the heart. Hence, when Aunt Sabrina Ardley, Kate's father's sister, hitherto unknown to her, had surprised her with an invitation to come to England as her private secretary, Beryl took a brief holiday from sensational fiction. When she returned to her pen, or rather to the new royal typewriter Aunt Sabrina had purchased for her, she began to experiment with a different kind of writing, detective stories of a more psychological bent, with a deeper explanation of motive and feeling. Stories in which the female characters were portrayed not as victims or the objects of men's fascination, but as free and independent women who made their way in the world by their own wits. Mindful that the greatest number of her readers were women, Kate took care to create adventuresome heroines fired with spirit and determination. And mindful that the most powerful fictions are those that portray life realistically, she began to incorporate real people into her plots, disguising them as necessary to preserve their privacy. The new interest required Beryl Bardwell to yield up her place as the queen of sensation fiction, as Frank Leslie had crowned her, and look for a more congenial publisher. About this time, though, Aunt Sabrina and her sister, Aunt Jaggers, died in a truly horrible way, poisoned. Kate, who had been instrumental in discovering the killer and in fact formed her attachment to Charles during this investigation of the death, discovered to her surprise that Bishop's Keep and a modest fortune was now hers. No longer compelled by financial exigency to tailor her fiction to tastes not her own, she could now write exactly as she chose. The change had fired Kate with a new kind of creative energy. Recently, several of her stories had appeared in Blackwell's Monthly and had been widely praised. The pseudonym Beryl Bardwell was being hailed as a female Conan Doyle, a compliment that first brought Kate a great deal of amusement, to which was quickly added an equal measure of apprehension. She had not disguised some of her characters or events as thoroughly as she might have done. What would happen if the identities of these real people were discovered? What would happen if she were discovered? Indeed, Kate's private life as a writer had nearly prevented her from marrying Sir Charles Sheridan. She had loved him with a growing passion for months, but had been reluctant to admit her feelings even to herself, knowing that her Irish blood and American upbringing made her unattractive to a member of the landed gentry, and believing that her writing, which she fully intended to be a life's work, would make her positively undesirable to any man. But Sir Charles, when he learned of her covert occupation, was warmly supportive, or the more perhaps because his fascination with the new scenes of criminal detection coincided with her interest in fictional crime. In fact, their engagement had occurred in the midst of his investigation of several murders at Eastern Lodge, during a weekend house party where the Prince of Wales was also a guest, and their hostess, the Countess of Warwick, a chief suspect. Together, Sir Charles and Kate had brought the inquiry to a successful conclusion, to the grateful relief of His Highness and the Countess. With a flourish, Mutt opened the double doors to the stately dining room and stepped through. "Dinner is served," he announced. Charles turned to Kate, a smile crinkling the corners of his sherry-brown eyes. "Well, my dear," he asked, "shall we see what surprises from the kitchen await us this evening?" The vicar raised his shaggy white eyebrows. "I do hope you have not lost your cook," he said earnestly. "Sarah Pratt is amongst the finest in the county." "Mrs. Pratt is still with us," Kate replied. "Charles has presented her with a new challenge, however, and she has not quite mastered it yet. Last night's dinner," she added to the vicar in a low voice, "was a culinary catastrophe. I hope we fare better tonight." "A new challenge?" the vicar asked and chuckled. "You cannot be suggesting that there is something in the line of cookery that confounds Mrs. Pratt." Kate gestured at the gaslight that illuminated the drawing room. "You notice, perhaps, that we are modernizing Bishop's Keep. Charles has piped water to the kitchen and installed a gas cooker. The water is welcome, but Mrs. Pratt is in mortal fear of a gas explosion." She glanced down at the mahogany table, which was covered with damask and decorated with clusters of green smilax interwoven with stephanotis and rosy pink lapageria. The silver gleamed, the crystal impergnus sparkled, and the new gas wall sconces cast a golden glow over the room. But Kate shook her head with all the apprehension of a hostess who has good reason to fear the worst. "I do hope," she said prayerfully, "that things are going well in the kitchen."